hope to educate people about so much Asian American history that's been lost.
Chinatown and the Chinese people here have been fighting for the right to exist and be human beings for 170 years.
We're all on different parts of our journey.
I'm part of the fight, I'm part of the movement, and my voice is being heard, so I just feel like I have to be hopeful.
And that hope is coming from many people, young, old, Asian, black, brown, white. People are talking, listening, and we hope learning. And yet, the violence in the Asian community hasn't let up. Now, May is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And as we celebrate AAPI, stories, people in the community, there's also anger and sadness. Now, some fear that racism against Asians will get worse as we open up more post-pandemic. But certainly, it's something that's still happening. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. This is our first of 2 Race in America episodes that we are doing this month. I'm Marcus Washington.
And I'm Jessica Aguirre. The group Stop AAPI Hate says the number of altercations surged to more than 6,600 in March, nearly doubling in a year. And more than half of those victims are women. Most of them said that they were verbally harassed.
Yeah, from a victory in the court of law to the Bay Area. Well, a man who first proposed the idea of AAPI Month. Since the late 70s, when the calendar flips to May, it's time to celebrate Asian American and Pacific Islander heritage. It's an annual commemoration that began when local son, Congressman Norman Mineta, co-authored a resolution in 1977 calling for Asian Pacific Heritage Week. It was proposed to honor the first Japanese to immigrate here to the U.S. and the Chinese immigrants who toiled on the Transcontinental Railroad. That week-long observance later becoming an entire month. But what's traditionally a month of celebration has been marred by almost daily reports of attacks on the Asian community. A man assaulted by a group in San Leandro.
Trying to get my purse.
A woman knocked to the ground while shopping for fruit in Oakland's Chinatown. And then, last week, 2 women stabbed at a San Francisco bus stop.
Without a sense of safety, nothing else can go on.
Meanwhile, prosecutors in Atlanta announced this week they would file hate crime charges against the suspect who allegedly killed 8 people, including 6 Asian women at 2 massage businesses.
Find the defendant guilty.
But many, disheartened by these attacks on equality, found hope somewhere else. A jury found former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin guilty of murder and manslaughter in the death of George Floyd.
A Latino man was having a beer in a park on a bright and sunny day.
But as justice came to Floyd's family, another Bay Area family is left demanding justice.
Put your hands behind your back, okay?
26-year-old Mario Gonzalez died after a scuffle with Alameda police officers who held him to the ground for more than 4 minutes.
My Mario needed justice.
They are steps forward and steps backward. Reminders that equality is a battle, where the fight is for every inch.
Well, she is committed to moving the Asian community forward with a bit of humor if she can. I'm talking about Margaret Cho. The actor, comedian, and activist is not afraid to speak her mind. Growing up in San Francisco, Cho and her family faced racism, and she says one of the biggest misconceptions about Asian Americans that she wants to debunk is that Asians are the so-called model minority. Cho says that moniker is just plain offensive.
The problem with the statement model minority, it makes it out to seem like there's a right way and a wrong way to be a minority. And, you know, both of those terms are, even being model and being minority, they're both offensive.
So when you say being called a minority is offensive, why is that?
Because it's really like to denote that there is a less than real reason to be there. It dehumanizes a group of people. And I think that when we can look at the way that we other in language, so minority is an example, and the use of the term is an example, or majority is an example, because in truth, people of color are the majority. Or there is like an idea that we're actually like dividing ourselves in a way that is not productive. The fact that we have never gotten over a racist system, a racist country, and we've been here for so long, claim that we are the greatest country in the world. We are not. We are racist, and we have never come to terms with it.
Tell me a little bit about the podcast and mortal minority. Explain that to me and how that's the premise of the podcast, and what are you exploring in this podcast that goes down that line?
It's really all about killing off the idea of the model minority and the idea of minorities in general, but also it's to look at Asian American history from a criminal perspective, from crimes against us, crimes by us, crimes we're victimized by, crimes that sort of like refute the idea of us being a model. I've always talked about racism, and I've always talked about feeling different and feeling alone in my industry, in my community. As a queer Korean American woman, there's a lot of things that I've sort of made to feel othered, made to feel less than. And so I'm bringing that perspective, which humor is really about hope. Humor and laughter bring a sense of there being another moment to laugh about.
Is there a moment that sticks out with you about your time that you grew up with your parents in San Francisco that really formed this person, this humor, this desire, you know, to cross that bridge?
I think, unfortunately, it was AIDS. It was AIDS that showed me that a community, an entire community, can die and be hated for that. So a lot of the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes, like, to me, reminds me a lot of the homophobic hate crimes that happened in the 80s and 90s, because people were using violence and AIDS as an excuse to commit violence against people who they deemed different, which was the gay community.
Tell me about aspirational whiteness. I know you've talked about that before. What is it?
It's the way that my parents made us go skiing.
I'm Hispanic, so I get that. We don't do snow.
I don't want to go skiing. I don't want to go to the country club. Like, everybody wants to have this education that is kind of ensconces you in these very white institutions, whether that's Yale and Harvard, it's Massachusetts. It's a feeling of needing to somehow pretend to be white. You know, my parents endured so much racism that they thought maybe they'll be safer if they're ensconced in white society. Maybe we'll be safer, but that's never the case. You know, it's just a way to somehow avert racism, but you're only making yourself a target. You're internalizing it.
Wow, that's heavy. So how do you combat that? I mean, I guess realization, like what we're doing here right now, right?
Yeah, it's just talking about it and understanding that it doesn't make me less Asian. It doesn't make me less of an American. I hope to educate people about so much Asian American history that's been lost. It's invisible, that's forgotten, to show that we need to bring this into awareness, that we've been a part of America since 1849. And we're one of the main reasons why the country united after the Civil War, because we're one of the main reasons the railroad existed, to connect the country. And so we were cropped out of that history. We're cropping ourselves back in.
And you're connecting people again.
Right.
Thank you, Margaret. Really enjoyed the conversation with you.
Thank you.
Take your rightful place. Well, look, up next, we're going to continue the minority myth conversation with activist Michelle Kim. I really enjoyed this conversation, Jessica. I can't wait to share with you all what she says is missing in the conversations many of us are having.
Plus, Grammy and Oscar winner h.e.r talks to the international superstar about growing up biracial in Vallejo and about finding purpose in her music.
We have to reject the narrative. Those are the words from activist and author Michelle Kim. Now, Kim is also the CEO and co-founder of Awaken. It's an organization that provides workshops around diversity, social justice, and inclusion. So I sat down with her and we got honest. And I'm sure for some that conversation is going to be uncomfortable because it's so honest. We talked about anti-Black and anti-Asian sentiments, and I asked her what she thinks is missing with these conversations we're having.
I wish that we were talking more explicitly about white supremacy. And I think that is where people get really uncomfortable. You know, we like to think of white supremacy as what we see on TV of neo-Nazis and the Confederate flags and the KKKs, but we all have breathed in the toxicity of white supremacy culture, and it is within us. And I think this is the pattern of white supremacy culture that tends to pit marginalized people against each other.
We've seen many of these incidents. The suspect has been another person of color, a black man. There is this unspoken or sometimes spoken tension between the Asian community and the black community.
When we see an incident that's been committed by a black individual and paint a stereotypical picture of that being reflective of the entire black community, I think that's where we fall into the trap of, yet again, anti-blackness and the rhetoric that is so easily repeated that's been fed to us by the white supremacy culture. It's also part of the responsibility in all the viewers is not making generalized statements and narratives that paint a stereotypical picture of an entire community based on acts of a few individuals. Because for every incident that we see, I also see a whole slew of black folks coming out in solidarity, condemning what happened.
I want to talk about, you know, the model minority myth.
Yeah.
I've read some things that talked about that, how the Asian community was the chosen one. Do you agree with that? Do you see why people say that?
Model minority myth was created to be used to juxtapose Asian immigrants from the black Americans who were fighting for civil rights. It comes at the expense of our own people who are harmed by that myth, as well as other marginalized communities like the black community, because the model minority myth stands on the foundation of anti-blackness.
Create that divide, therefore they won't get stronger together.
That's right, and we always forget to look up at the system that is creating the conditions of scarcity in which we have to feel like we have to fight and compete with each other.
All of this that we're talking about, how has that affected you personally?
So I am a queer woman. I am Korean immigrant. So I was born and raised in South Korea, and I moved here when I was 12. I was told by my own parents that in order for you to succeed here, you need to assimilate. You need to have an English name. You need to speak English at home, and I fed into that. And so part of my success came from me being able to assimilate, and I have to own that.
What does it feel like to own that? Because that's a lot.
I think part of that reckoning has to happen within us first, right? That we have to reject the narratives, and there's also discomfort that comes with having to give up something that you've been able to have access to because of your complicity.
As we're talking about bucking the system, transformative justice, your thoughts on that?
Whether we agree on the tactics or not, we all want the same thing, which is we want our people, especially our elders, to be safe. So if we are trying to solve for that, what's going to get us safe isn't the short-term solution of arresting and mass incarceration and increased police presence. That may feel like a short-term relief for some.
Or somewhat victory.
Somewhat of justice is what people like to say. There's accountability. But there's no accountability in the system that is birthing this violence in the first place. My mom, a few years ago, was mugged and robbed by a black man in the street of San Francisco. She was hit in the head, and she fell down to the ground, and the person took her purse. And when the police came, they gave her the police report, and that was the end of it. What she needed was access to mental health services, somebody to take her to the hospital, somebody to help file for identity theft precautions.
How do we get to a root of a problem that's covered with so many weeds? You know, just getting to, you know, the soil before you even get to the root is a tough job.
Systemic interventions are important, and we have to also match that with personal transformation, because otherwise those interventions are not going to be adhered to, and we're going to continue to become roadblocks to the systems that we're trying to change and transform.
Layers on top of layers of what she was saying. I mean, it was just so revealing and really a refreshing conversation to have, because there's so many myths that you hear from other communities, and to be able to talk and say, okay, look, I have a question about this. And it was just it was a freeing moment, I think.
I also really liked her message of personal accountability, and I mentioned to you in the break, you know, when we were listening to her, because what Margaret said was about that aspirational whiteness, and if you've grown up as a minority, you fall into that. And now what Michelle is saying is that we have to have our own accountability about how we're playing into the system as well as minorities. I knew growing up that I was always being told that I needed to be more, I needed to assimilate, I needed to be white. And I've sometimes now I'm accused of being too white, because you kind of, you know, you lose that. So it's about, what is your own accountability in here, and how am I adding to this?
Right. I think a lot of us, we fall victim to it, because we think, okay, this is the right way, this is the way, the path to success. And if I'm more white.
So our parents didn't mean to do bad. They just meant
they
wanted you to be a part of the system.
Right. We have to take it back, though.
Yeah. All right. She's taking it back. R&B superstar Vallejo's Her, making sure that her voice is part of the fight for social justice. Her song I Can't Breathe won a Grammy, and Fight For You won an Oscar. She's 23 years old, and she's already using her music for social change. Her real name is actually Gabriella Wilson. Our show h.e.r. talked to Wilson about being biracial, about her music, and about her name.
You know, I kind of was making this collection of songs that represented what I was going through as a young woman, just what I like to call the evolution of young woman, and making very honest music. And, you know, we all go through things in high school, just as we're becoming a woman. It gets very vulnerable and uncomfortable at times. And these songs represented that time. And I felt like with my music, since it was so honest, it was very hard for me to write this honest music. And I decided to just release it under her and just have a silhouette and no name, no face or anything, so the music could be the forefront, because I felt like I was having everything revealed in the music.
Being from Vallejo, in my era, I didn't see black and white. I just saw people as being people. But in your generation, did you see color?
I've always known who I am. I've always acknowledged who other people are and what they represent. I think being from the Bay, you're just used to that. You know, you see a lot of Asians, you see a lot of black people, you see everything.
Growing up, did you feel like you had to be, were you black? Were you Filipino? Did it matter?
Yeah, I definitely, you know, when I was young, sometimes I would feel too Filipino, too Asian for the black kids, and too black for the Asian kids, and kind of felt like an outsider a little bit, and trying to figure out who I am and how I balance. And that's just part of being young, is accepting who you are and learning who you are, what you're comfortable with, what you're not, and the things that make you who you are. And sometimes you have to know what you're not, you know, to know exactly who you are. So it comes down to compassion for me. Asian, black, Hispanic, it comes down to compassion and being human. And there's a lot of change that needs to happen. And it's so much more than saying, you know, I support you, or, oh, I love black people, I love Asian people. It's so much more than that now. It's noticing the inequities. It's noticing what's going on and actually actively doing something about it. It's about being proactive and not reactive.
So how did you write that song, I Can't Breathe?
So the song really came from a FaceTime call with one of my good friends, h.e.r. who I write with a lot. And we were just talking on the phone, and our words kind of became the lyrics immediately. And, you know, we said things like, how do we cope when we don't love each other? What is a gun to a man that surrenders? You know, and then I was playing the guitar chords and kind of just started singing that chorus, I Can't Breathe, and just... it was really honest and emotional. And then it was very, very much in the moment, you know, very much a song that represented what we were, I think, all going through, the anxiety and the pain and just the confusion and frustration of, George Floyd, and then the protests that were happening, and not knowing where things were going to go. And even with the pandemic, just the pain of that, and how we're forced to look at ourselves and reflect, and how we're forced to really look at what's going on around us and do something about it. So I wrote that song, during the summer. And then Fight for You song was from Judas and the Black Messiah, a movie about Fred Hampton. And, in the late 60s, early 70s, and what the Panthers did. And there's parts of our history that we don't even know. And that's, I think, on purpose, because knowledge is power. So I think with my songs, my responsibility is to spread that knowledge and keep hope alive. And I think that's what I was doing in these songs, expressing my own pain and kind of bringing joy through music and bringing hope through music. And I'm part of the fight. I'm part of the movement, and my voice is being heard. So I just feel like I have to be hopeful. I have to be positive and continue to do what I do. And that's all I can do.
Well, thank you so much for spending the time. I really appreciate it, having everything revealed.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good to see you.
Did I mention she's 23? Yeah. Her is out with new music, plans to release an album this summer, and there's some acting in her future as well. We've posted Cheryl's entire 15-minute interview on our website, NBCBayArea.com/RacinAmerica. She's impressive.
Yeah, I love her. I really do. I love her music. All right, well, up next, I talked to an investor and entrepreneur, Susie Rue. We're going to talk about how her career and perspective on life changed after meeting her business partner. Well, sometimes it takes just one person to influence another one's life. Last month, I met Susie Rue. She's the co-founder of Q&A. This is a music tech startup. And she says that her business partner opened her mind when talking about race. Her family moved to L.A. back in 1992. This was shortly after the Rodney King riots, when racial tensions were high. Well, Susie talked to me about that and reflected back on the microaggressions and fear within her own family.
I remember an instance of my mom asking me, do you need to be friends with that person? When that person had come over to the house to, play basketball outside. And I remember thinking of this comment from my mom, this question, is rooted in misunderstanding and rooted in fear.
You knew it then?
I knew it then. I knew it then. And I remember telling her, Mom, that's not okay. The unspoken fear from the Asian community against anyone that was other, the Black community, the brown community, the misunderstanding of they are not like us.
Being an immigrant, you came here at 5, you knew very little of the language. Did you face a lot of racism from, your fellow classmates? I
remember as a joke being gifted a pair of Martian slippers because I was the resident alien.
But what did that feel like to be called an I don't know if you understood what that even meant, or did it hurt you, or did you just think like, oh, okay?
It's like one of those, it could have hurt, but you just take it. You just take it. And I think that's what's happening with Asians now, right? Realizing that we take it, and it was okay to take it all the way up to this point. And it's not okay to take it anymore. My family's history in the United States is just coming up on 30 years. I think about all the time that the context in which we arrived was months after the LA riots, months after the Rodney King trials. I think about that moment almost 30 years ago and how the Korean community and the Korean American community, so much deep fear and transgression happened against the Black community, against anyone else who was in the police department at the time. And I think about, if we do not go back and think about what happened and learn why, how do we move forward in changing the perspective of the elders? How do we use this time of the pandemic and what happened with George Floyd and what happened just in the past couple of months with Asian American transgressions to bridge the gap and have conversations that build solidarity.
When we talk about understanding, it came with your business partner, and correct me if I'm wrong, but your business partner is a Black man from West Philly.
Yeah, so my business partner, my co-founder, Troy Carter, He and I met 6 years ago, just around this time, 6 years ago. And our first one-on-one conversation, that was after a work conversation, our first one-on-one conversation really was about identity and mission and values and family. And I was able to share with him about my American dream experience of having immigrant entrepreneur parents, whether that's the stereotypical focus of, driving taxis or opening liquor stores or opening restaurants or nail salons. I think that resonated with him, and it resonated with me certainly hearing about his own American dream experience, but from a perspective of West Philadelphia.
When you say that, I can actually see my family history in the background of, working as sharecroppers, working in cotton fields, working as, housekeepers. That's what my generation did prior to me so I can stand on their shoulders. And you're saying the same thing.
If I didn't work with Troy every day for the past 6 years, I might not be in awareness of his own history and the history of his community and his family. We have a shared experience in our own individual experiences. Just like what you and I just had of your family history and my family history, and how do we use that collective experience of gratitude for our elders and what they sacrificed and push us forward and bring them along too, so that fear and microaggression doesn't have to be repeated, and it's going to take time, but how do we help buffer the time that's needed with love and compassion and empathy?
And the one thing I love about that is what I've been seeing through all these conversations that we're having with people, no matter what our ethnic background may be, it's so similar. Just our paths to where we are today, what our families did to make sure that we had more. It's that love, it's that compassion. And I think the thing that h.e.r. said that I think is so interesting: notice our differences and acknowledge them. We have to do that, because I can learn a lot from you and you can learn a lot from me.
And yet so many of the things we share are similar in the experience. If we just talk to each other about it, we'd see that we have more likenesses than we have disparities. And isn't that the goal?
Yeah.
To see each other differently.
We're more alike than we are different.
Yeah.